Hey legionnaires, welcome back to the channel. I'm Omega on Edge, and today we're going to be talking about the Crimson Fist and continuing on with our previous video, this time focused on the red. Rin's world was the home world of the Crimson Fist chapter and was invaded by the Orcs in mid-M41. The Fists, led by Captain Draken of the 3rd Company, had earlier tried to sabotage an Orc war building on the nearby world Bad Landing, but failed. The Orcs rallied under Warlord Snagrod, the Arc-Arsonist of Caradon, and invaded in response, despite the almost suicidal nature of invading a Space Marine homeworld. The odds, however, shifted in the Orcs' favour when the Crimson Fist's Fortress Monastery was destroyed by a stray missile from its own defence system. Of more than 600 Space Marines stationed there, only 16, among them Chapter Master Pedro Cantor and Brother Captain Cortez, escaped the blast. The circumstantial evidence and coincidences have led some to believe that the official Assassinorum may have had a hand in the strange destruction of the Fortress Monastery, but no concrete evidence has ever come to light. The last 218 surviving Space Marines on Rin's world consolidated their defense at the planet's capital, New Rin City, and managed to stave off the invasion after a furious 18-month siege behind the city walls. The siege was broken by a relief force of more than 2,200 ships and elements of 6 Space Marine chapters, amongst them the Raven Ring of the Dark Angels, the Titan Legions and the Imperial Navy. With no more than 100 surviving Marines, the chapter came close to being disbanded due to irrecoverable battle losses, but since managed to recover. The chapter is back to half its original strength as of late M41. So in the previous video we focused solely on the blue armor. This video will be dedicated to painting the first layer of the red fist. Now, red is a notoriously difficult colour for beginners to paint, and this usually appears in the form of either highlighting the colour too much when adding white so that it becomes pink, or orange if we add yellow. Either way, we wouldn't call it red anymore. So I wanted to make sure that before we get to actually painting the reds, you start with a clear foundation and idea of what it is we're trying to achieve here. So let's take these apples for example. Now most of us would look at these murder fruits and say, yeah sure, that's red. And you'd be right, but if we isolated each area we would see that certain segments of the image are either brighter or darker than others. This is what we refer to as value. I won't go into too much detail now as it might get a bit complicated. What you do need to keep in mind is, whenever we are painting a colour which can easily jump from one area of the colour to the next, you want the majority of the image we see to be dominated by that colour. Simply put, the red we are going for must take up most of the space in the image, with the brighter areas being contained to smaller spaces so that we can see the value change, but not lose an understanding of what the colour actually is. Hopefully that makes sense, and if it doesn't, just comment below and we'll try to explain another way. Don't worry though, because as we'll be painting the model, you'll get a clear understanding when you start painting it yourself. Okay team, so here's the main colours for the red. Vermillion red is a strong primary red in terms of vibrancy and serves as a good replacement to the more expensive cadmium red. It also has a beautiful consistency that Scalecolor oils seem to have. Then we have Alizarine Crimson, which we'll use to enhance the saturation of our red, and as its lower value it will also act as a shade. So a quick note on this, we could use black to lower the value of our red, but as adding pure white or black to colour desaturates and reduces the vibrancy, we don't want that. So by adding some violet, not only are we keeping that vibrancy, but the blue in the violet mixture actually contrasts with the red and makes that pop. And I learned that from Henry at Coat of Paint. Lastly, we'll be using Scroll White. Now Scroll White is an off-white with a warmer temperature. The overall compositions we're going for on this model is warm, so though the blue of the armour is cold, by adding purples and yellow highlights, we warm the overall temperature of the piece, which just basically means that the model looks nicer to look at. Okay, so right onto the palette. I start by mixing my vermilion onto the palette, and I don't need much as the oils work best when actually flattened and spread around. I then take some Alizarine Crimson and add that to the mixture. Now the exact ratio here is tricky, but 1 or 2 drops should do. We're after a deeper midtone, which is where the bulk of our colour will sit. Just play it by eye and pay attention to the reference. Once you're happy with the midtone, we can then add some Winsor Violet. Again, this is a very powerful and dominating colour, so we don't need much. Mix this and the crimson together to keep the colour on the warmer side. Next up is the scroll white. Remember, we always need to mix the red into it, and not the other way around. Our aim is to keep that mixture fairly bright. Last up, and I forgot to film this footage for you in the previous video, we need to make our prime glaze mixture. So the exact ratio for this mixture isn't a complete science, as some of the paints brands will usually be easier to mix than others. Windsor Newton, for example, are especially sticky and thick paints, so we'll need to add a fair amount of thinner to make the mixture work. Add 4 parts of thinner to 1 part of paint, using equal parts of crimson and violet. Starting with a darker colour is effective because it allows the oil paint to immerse itself in all the recesses of the model. Also, when we begin to paint on top of it, our brush strokes will shift the paint around. This also allows us to add thick paint to already wet surface with more control, and also helps our finish to look sharp. Okay, let's get to it. So the first thing I do is apply my thinned out violet and crimson over the surface of the fist, and we're just trying to submerge the model in just a little bit of the oil paint. We're not trying to drown it, but we just want it to be getting to all of those crevices. So have fun with this section. You'll notice that it drops the value of the colour we'd already applied quite a lot, but that's fine because we're just basically trying to cover that and make sure we're over all of the surface areas we're going to paint on top of. Now I add in the Vermillion, and as you can see how powerful that paint is. However, when we start to blend it out, you'll start to notice that the saturation will drop and be reduced significantly, which is why we'll need multiple layers. Now the difficult thing here is to know when to stop blending. What I'm doing is I'm applying the paint on, and then I'm just judging each time, just pausing to make sure that I'm not blending too much. I don't want to completely ruin or rub the paint away. It's just spread it around. But it's this blending and brushing over the surface which allows us to add more paint. Normally, I think one of the things that people struggle with when painting with oil paints is wanting to layer on top of something and watching the blend get messed up when they try that. So a key rule is that you actually need to blend the surface first, and then you can add more paint. So I always start with the sides. I'm just moving my brush side to side over the model, blending out the area first, and then I blend the middle, and that just makes sure that I'm not going over the entire model too quickly and brushing away the paint that I need. I'm spreading it first, and then I'm actually blending it. And here's me just dragging over the surface to make sure it's going over to where I need it, and then I'm blending again. So nothing too complex. You can basically see the way I paint is basically just repeating. We're just repeating the steps. You're just using thicker and brighter paint each time you're building up. And this part is actually very similar to acrylics in like building up of layers, but we're just getting progressively thicker and progressively brighter with each subsequent layer. So here I've started with a smaller area because I wanted to just test out the slightly brighter value paint, which is our high mid-tone over that area, and I'm just spreading that along where it needs to be. So here I'm dabbing on the paint. I'm trying to keep it a bit more controlled without shifting the other area of the paint around too much. This is a technique I like to do when I'm just trying to have a bit more control, and now I'm blending side to side and to keep the area in a contained space. You don't have to do this, you can continue just blending it straight down in one place, but this just I found helps me with my control, and especially when I want to keep the reds where it needs to be. So yeah, it's just a repeat, guys. Nothing too serious, nothing too complex. And hopefully you can see just how the paint is being held there. Okay, so this next part, I'm letting that red dry and I'm adding in my shadow color to the back, and all I'm doing is trying to deepen the area of the shadow area of where the fist is in direct sunlight. After that, I start working on the fingers of the fist itself. And this is such a smaller space, we really don't need to worry too much about having to blend that out. We're just basically going to be placing the paint where we want it, and then the next section would be to actually just take our dry brush and blend that area, just smooth out the transitions as much as possible. We'll need to do this a few times just to make sure it has the same vibrancy as the large panel of fist above, but because it's curved down, it doesn't need to be as strong or bright. So all the areas that are curved away from the direct light will have a lower value than those on top. So we can actually just stop with the lower fingers there, and as we're applying the red into these brighter sections, we'll increase the value with subsequent brighter layers. So for this, you'll probably need a very small brush. I'd recommend going for a size 0 or 00 if you really want proper accuracy, and just make sure that you've flattened out your brush and you're using slow strokes. I'm not doing that in this video, and I should be, but I'm so used to it at this point that I know how much control I need. So there's the high mid-tone color over to the bright areas of the fist, all the areas in direct sunlight, and I'm just going to blend that out, keep it soft. So at this point I actually noticed that the fist fingers were brighter than the space on top, but I just needed to let that area dry, and that probably take a couple of minutes, maybe about five minutes to actually dry out completely so I can layer on top of it. So a lot of oil painting is just understanding when to stop and being willing to move on to other areas whilst another area is drying out. So that's what I'm doing here now. I'm just applying that fit paint, and because it's now been dried, look how easily that goes on. This is one of the advantages of using Scalecolor, like their paints seem to just go on really easily, really well, and that just allows me to blend without causing like a lot of brush strokes and a lot of brush marks. So just keep taking your time with this step, guys. Try not to be impatient. Red is hard, but now you can see what I was referring to with the apples. I'm now spreading that color, and that brighter area is contained to a significantly smaller space than the rest of the red, and we're just spreading it to where it needs to be into the rest of the volume so that it reads as brighter. And as it dries, it will start to reveal a bit of brush strokes, and that's fine. We're just going to blend this out and smooth it out as we go along, and in our second layer we'll refine it even more. Alright, so there's not much more to say on this section. I'll just let the video play, and if I need to comment on more, I will, so just enjoy. Okay, so what I've done there is I've added in my highlight and I've pulled that down to full amount. You can see that it's significantly thinner. So here we need a bit more accuracy. I'm blending that highlight into the rest of the armor, but I'm trying to keep it more thin and more contained. So if I do end up going over, that's fine, because I can just blend that with the next color. But I think at this point we're getting probably a bit too close to pink. It's too bright. So what I'll do, after I've blended this out, I'll go back in with the pure Vermillion on mid-tone and blend that to the side adjacent. It's quite nice, to be honest, at this point, but for me, I think at this, when I looked at it in the hand, it was a bit too bright. So I go in with our highlight color and I'm keeping that to the center, and then I'll dry brush this out, and at some point I'll go in with my Vermillion and blend that out so that we can get that red back. Just keeping my brush strokes really thin, really smooth, removing any excess paint that I've got and blending it. And you just need to be gentle because we don't want to tear the paint. And what I mean by that is we're just making sure that we're not ruining any of our previous work by going on too harshly or too hard. All of these brush strokes are really soft, and that's what allows us to have a really smooth surface. So here we have the rebound light of our red, and this is just showing that the armor is reflective. We did the same thing on the leg of the blue in our first video, and I'm just repeating that. Also to note, as we blend, we'll start to lose our original shadow, but that's fine. It's just about refining and adjusting our colors as we go. Now I'm getting the shadow and I'm just bringing back that deep shadow. This is what we call the Terminator. A lot of the time I'm using a lot of reference and language that might not be too familiar to you. When I do my basics video, I'll clarify these things, but the Terminator is essentially where the light and the darkness meet. That gap in between is our Terminator, and it's what allows our armor color to look reflective. Let's just keep needing to keep adjusting that as we go along. And here finally comes the Vermillion I was mentioning before. We're just bringing back that mid-tone and we're going to blend that into our shadow. There we go. And for now, that's pretty much it. Keep working on that. Keep refining that as much as you want, but just remember not to go too far. And you'll notice it might look a bit patchy in places, but that's fine because in our second layer, we're going to refine that and push it even further. So in the next video, we're going to be working on layer 2, which we'll use to really enhance our previous work and take it to the next level. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, feel free to like and subscribe as it helps the channel to grow. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below. I'll see you next time.